Welcome back to Rise and Rouse, a podcast for those who give a damn. I am your host, Erin Allgood, social impact strategist, consultant, and keen observer of the systems of dysfunction within organizations. Today, we're going to talk about some of the work that I do as a consultant behind the scenes. I'm going to pull that veil back a little bit for you all. And, really and truly, what I am doing oftentimes when I'm stepping into a scope of work with a client, whether that's through All Good Strategies or whether that's through the New Business Liberation Nexus Lab, I am really trying to get a full picture of how an organization functions, what the culture looks like, what are some of the systems and structures that are at play, and really starting to understand some of the dynamics between all of those different things. I really pride myself on my ability to step into a situation, step into a scope of work with a client, and start to recognize those symptoms of dysfunction really well. It's probably the most valuable skill that I have because it allows me to really get to the heart of issues within an organization very effectively and efficiently. And it helps me to very quickly also start to share things to the folks who are in power, usually the contacts that I have at the organization, in a way that starts to create the change before we've even moved into the second phase of the work, which is really important because we want to be able to start to see some momentum within the work as quickly as we possibly can. At the same time, I'm not making a quick judgment necessarily based on a single symptom. I'm actually taking a holistic view at everything, and I'm iterating on those observations throughout an entire scope of work. So I might have a quick take on something in the very beginning, and I will wait until I have sufficient evidence before I actually start to either make recommendations or even bring it up to the folks who are in power, because I need to make sure that the way that I am presenting it to folks is coming from a place of balance and a place of understanding. Because oftentimes what's happening is that folks don't want things to be bad, right? Like most organizations aren't interested in having shitty dynamics or a crappy culture or anything like that. Some of them are just not very interested in actually shifting those things and actually creating the change that they need to, because that takes a lot of time and effort. But really and truly, folks are oftentimes really happy when I start to surface some of the things that they might have been blind to before. And sometimes that happens because people just, departments are siloed and folks aren't actually seeing what's happening within their scope of practice within the organization. Sometimes, it's just because there are too many other fires that are being put out, so that it makes it really hard to pay attention to the things that are dysfunctional, because maybe folks don't actually see them, or maybe they're just moving too fast, or their attention is really on the other things that are on fire. So it's not oftentimes something that is bad per se. It can sometimes just be something that has fallen away, that has been just a little bit neglected. And that's not because people are callous or don't care, but more just because they just can't have their finger on the pulse of everything that's going on. There's a lot of moving parts. So I try to come with recommendations that are rooted in empathy and understanding when I am working with clients, because really and truly, they oftentimes just need somebody who feels like they're on their side and is being supportive, while also making sure that they are being held accountable for any potential harm that is being caused and things like that. So what are some of the symptoms? Usually within the first phase of the work, I'm doing a deep dive into just a lot, reviewing a lot of documents. I'm having conversations with the board and the staff members. I am, really and truly, that's really the core of that. Depending on the scope of work, I sometimes will be, sending out surveys and things like that too, to get a read on things from, say, members of the organization also. Folks who are not at the closest to the organization, but have they're a bit of a step removed. And I'm taking all of that information and really starting to form some opinions based upon that. So some of the things that I'm actually looking for as I'm going through that process, looking to see if, are emails coming at all hours from somebody who's in a position of power? It might be, in some cases, just somebody who has kids and works whenever they can get a free moment. There's a lot of people who have non-traditional work schedules and don't adhere to that 9 to 5, but it can become a symptom of workaholism or overwork if it's being done quite a bit. And so I try to keep an eye on all of that, especially seeing when my clients are emailing me as well too. Am I their last email that they're thinking about at 10 o'clock at night? Does that mean that they actually value the work that we're doing together? Or is that really just a function of when they're able to get a moment away and a moment of peace to be able to shoot off an email today? So I try to, kind of check in on some of those kinds of things. And sometimes it really is just, there's one person who tends to kind of take it all on and, really prides themselves on the sheer amount of work that they're doing, the sheer amount of hours that they're putting in. But more often than not, that's trickling down to lower level staff as well, too. And so even though they might be getting verbally a message that says, take your PTO, don't email all the time, don't log in after hours. If they're seeing it modeled differently, if they're seeing a model of overwork, they're going to tend towards that because they see that as just kind of the status quo within an organization. I also take into account, what's the dynamics between the board and the staff? Is there a board member who yells at staff? Is there a board member who is dictating the work that the staff are supposed to be doing? And is that what is that chain of command that's really happening between the board and the staff? So most of the time, what we want to see within a nonprofit situation is that we want to see most of the communications from the board going through the CEO or the executive director, and then that being filtered down to the staff, because it can start to cause issues when it comes to the communication of things, and it can cause confusion on behalf of staff who think, oh, I guess board members are my boss now and not my supervisor or not my executive director. I'm supposed to be taking orders from the board instead. And then staff tend to be pulled in a lot of different directions, and they don't necessarily know who they should be responding to. And they don't necessarily know who is the right person to be setting priorities for their work. And so what can happen there, I will oftentimes say that we need to get a lot more clarity on the roles and responsibilities and who makes what kinds of decisions and what kind of communication channels do we have in place to avoid these types of things from happening. There's also things like terrible meetings. This is a side of dysfunction as well, too, because there's a lack of direction, there's a lack of organization. A terrible meeting that's being run by a supervisor or an executive director, it might just be that they have never been trained in how to run better meetings, or it might be that they themselves don't actually know what the top priorities should be. And so that's something that I want to always keep in mind as well, too. If they aren't able to focus and understand how to deliver information to the people that are reporting to them, that is sometimes, it's a leadership issue. It's also a sign of dysfunction as well, too. I've also seen before with a particular client of mine a few years back where they used to use meetings for accountability. So they, instead of being able to just say, all right, let's check in on this a couple weeks from now, or here's a deadline, make sure that you're working towards this. This client, the culture within the organization was to just set a weekly or biweekly meeting for updates on that. And so they would use that as the means of creating an artificial deadline for themselves. So I have this meeting coming up, so I need to be able to report on this thing. And so I need to make progress on this. That can be all well and good, except for when you have, 60 to 70% of your time is being spent in these accountability meetings rather than doing the work, which was the case with this client that I had. And when I pointed that out, I tried to help them in really understanding hey, let's figure out when a meeting is actually needed instead of just using meetings for accountability purposes. And I haven't checked in with them in a while, so I don't know how effective my assistance in that case was. But my sincere hope is that they've been able to adopt some better practices. The other thing that I've seen oftentimes too, that again is another symptom of dysfunction, is systems that are being used haphazardly. So things like a system is not easy to use. So I'm talking about like maybe it's the CRM. So like or a database that you're using to track all of your donors or something like that. Or maybe it's a project management software. So if it's clunky and hard to use, or nobody's actually using them because there's no commitment to using them, or people are just like in sheer overwork and don't have time to update a system, or maybe there's a bunch of different trackers that are being used and none of them, there's no centralized space. And so people have to not only remember to update multiple individual trackers, you also have to remember how to find each of them and what's the file name for that, because things aren't centrally located, which causes just a lot of mental load for staff. A couple more symptoms that come to mind here is, superficial involvement of stakeholders. So say an organization's hosting a bunch of listening sessions because they want to hear from the community, they want to hear from their members, they want to hear from, whomever those external stakeholders are. Because it's really important to say a strategic planning process or perhaps like a community engagement process, two things that I work on with organizations oftentimes. And what happens is that my client is usually looking for that as a check the box, activity. What oftentimes happens with stakeholders is that they are being asked to share input or feedback, and they are not meaningfully integrated into the decision-making process, or there is no real clear path for how their input and their feedback is being integrated into a final deliverable. The other thing that I will oftentimes see as well too is that, sometimes my clients won't be super clear about when they're going to get back to the folks that have participated. So they might be just kind of gathering them for this like couple of hours usually to get this kind of information, but then there's no commitment to being able to report back to folks, or they say they will, and then they actually don't. It's a very transactional way of working, and it's something that I am always on the lookout for. Transactional ways of working is something that happens quite often within organizations, and it's mainly because, one, people are just moving real fast. It's really hard to do that deep, meaningful engagement. People don't have models for how to do it. They've never seen it happen before. They don't know what it's supposed to look like. So maybe that might just be passed down from, previous, supervisors and things like that, how they were trained. And also like the way that our dominant culture operates is that we don't have ways of being able to model those kinds of relationships, that relational way of working versus the transactional. I've had it happen a couple of times where I've had folks who will blame the internal culture of an organization while not attenuating to structure. And so what that will tell me is that, this is, and I'll give this example that I've used many times before in my life. If I hear somebody tell me that they don't have a great culture internally and that they need to work on their culture, I will oftentimes ask, what do they mean by that? Because we don't fix culture by getting a cake for somebody's birthday. And I know I've used this example before in a different episode, but there was a time where I was attending an event and this guy was getting an award for best business something. And he was like, you know what we do? We give everybody the day off on their birthday. That's how we create a good culture. And I could not, my eyes like almost fell out of their sockets. I rolled my eyes so hard because it was just like such a gross, like it wasn't even a humble brag. It was a straight up brag. Giving somebody a day off or bringing birthday cake in for somebody's birthday is not going to make a better culture. Yes, it's nice to do nice things for people, but if you don't have structural aspects backing it up, it's just shit, And so when I talk about like the structural aspects, like, do people have more than 2 weeks of paid time off? Are people being paid fairly for their work? Are people being treated with respect internally? Do people feel valued within the organization? Are there strong policies that help to back up, any of the cultural aspects that they're trying to reinforce? Those are the things I start to look at because structure is a lot easier to put into place and then culture will follow. Now, Emerald, my business partner in the Liberation Nexus Lab, she'll tell you It's the other way around. Like we fix culture and then the structure can follow. But that's why we're both such good partners to one another, because I will oftentimes come at that structural, avenue, and she'll come at the cultural, and we're able to create some really awesome stuff for clients when we're both like working towards both of those ends within a scope of work with a client. So, those are a couple of different examples there of the symptoms I'm looking for when I'm starting to do work with an organization. And why am I talking about symptoms here? I'm talking about symptoms because symptoms are really helpful for starting to see patterns that have deeper roots, right? So I never want to step into an organization and only be like solving their symptoms, right? Like the symptoms are not what I am actually after. I am actually after getting at the root causes of this dysfunction so that the organization can flourish and thrive moving forward. And again, like the reason why I'm talking about all of this and why this is relevant to both the work I do with Algo Strategies and the Liberation Nexus Lab is because dysfunctional organizations are oftentimes not just, they are not equitable. And oftentimes the rules that people are abiding by are not clear. And so people can oftentimes feel like they're never able to get it right because the goalposts are moving. That is what dysfunction does within organizations. And that is how dysfunction is connected to unjust and inequitable workplaces. So once you start to understand what's up, once you start to understand see the symptoms, you can start to address the root causes. This is where I like to explain to folks, that one-off solutions don't solve things fully. It's actually really, really important to go deep and make a commitment to solving those root causes. It requires a lot of time and energy, and it also requires significant buy-in from stakeholders too, from the internal stakeholders. It means that there's going to be changes that are going to be coming about as a result of this process, as a result of clients working with me. I don't step into organizations and promise that nothing's ever going to change, because what the fuck is the point of hiring me if you don't want change? If you just want to be continuing to do the same thing, like that to me is lunacy. Don't pay me tens of thousands of dollars just to like pat you on the head and say everything's fine. It's just so silly. And so I have to be really careful about how I'm laying out these issues to internal stakeholders or leadership team, whomever I'm working with, board staff, because of the emotions that people carry into this kind of work. This is not something, I am not one of those consultants who is just like completely aloof, doesn't care about people's feelings. I deeply, deeply care about the emotions that people are bringing into these processes, because a lot of people think that they've been doing things wrong for a really long time, and they might be aware of the harm that they're causing. They might not. They might feel defensive, especially when I bring up some of these issues. I've had that happen many, many times before where people get really defensive. So I am really careful about how I present the symptoms and what I suspect are the root causes. And I'm also very empathetic in terms of how I am presenting the solutions that I'm proposing as well, too. Because so much of the change that has to happen is going to come from that emotional side of things. It's not coming from the actual doing and checking the box of the recommendations I have. It really is going to come from people shifting their mindset. So they have to believe that now that they know better, they're going to do better. They have to believe that there is merit in making all of these changes, doing all of this hard work, because there is something better on the other side. They have to believe that solving these issues is actually going to create greater harmony. It's going to create less dysfunction. It's going to just improve the overall aspects of everything that folks are doing. And again, like bringing this back to like, why do I care? Why do we care about this? Like, obviously I care about people's, well-being within an organization, but all of the organizations I work with are also mission driven. They are trying to create social impact within the world in some shape, way, or form. And they care deeply about the impact that they're creating. They want to be doing this in a equitable, just way. They have social justice values integrated into their work in some shape, way, or form. They might not be living them exactly, and that's part of what I do with them. Is like I help to help them to see what is not in alignment with the values they have, because that is a huge indicator. Again, like talk about symptoms. If they look at the values that they have solidified either through a strategic planning process or through another scope of work with me, and they realize they're not actually operating in alignment with that, that's a big symptom that tells me that, things have just gotten pretty off course in a lot of ways. So I always have to bring it back to them and say, what is out of alignment here? How did it get out of alignment? And what is it going to take to bring it back into alignment? And is this even relevant anymore? Sometimes a value isn't actually relevant anymore to an organization, and we actually have to throw it out and, and create new ones because perhaps things haven't changed in a long time and they need to be updated. There's a lot of different reasons for why I look at those symptoms, but it is usually trying to get back to what those root causes are so that we can create better workplaces, so that these amazing nonprofits or mission-based for-profit organizations are able to do their work better. They're able to have better impact in the world because they're not wasting time and energy on bullshit. And that to me is really, really important aspect of what I try to do with them. So let's kind of bring it back a little bit now to what are the root causes of these issues? Root causes are sometimes that organizations grow really fast and they never actually think about what they need to grow in a sustainable manner. So especially when we talk about things like systems, like a database or like a project management software or something like that, nobody has taken the time to really vet those systems and make sure that they actually are going to work for them, or nobody has taken the time to necessarily think about, how are we going to revisit and see if these are the best systems for us still, moving forward. There is that like sunken cost fallacy that comes to play oftentimes because organizations don't want to go spend more money on things that if they've already sunk money into a database, like they don't want to go and get a new database. They don't want to have to go pay somebody to customize it for them again. They want to start over searching for something new. But sometimes that makes sense. I was talking to a colleague recently and she was saying, well, like the database that we're looking at is going to cost us about $10,000 and $10,000 a year. So comes with like a lot of support from the company and so on and so forth. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like $10,000 in the scheme of what this organization, pulls in terms of how much more ease it was going to cost, it was going to bring to the staff members who were doing that, how much it was going to save in labor costs. That $10,000 was a drop in the bucket when you looked at all of the different dimensions of it. It was like a slam dunk in my mind to go with that because it was going to solve all of their problems and it was only going to cost them $10,000. To me, it just made so much sense. And I know it's a lot of money, but when I was just like, it's going to save somebody $10,000 easily in staff costs. So there's that sunken cost fallacy. There's that scarcity mindset that shows up oftentimes within, especially nonprofit organizations who are like, well, we just don't have the money for these things. We don't have the money to be able to pay people well. We don't have the money to invest in the systems and structures that we're going to need. We don't have the money, X, Y, Z, whatever excuse that might be. And that's very true. Like resources are limited and they're getting even more limited as all of these social issues within our society ramp up and the economy gets worse. Like all of those different things are true. And also you cannot run a sustainable business model if you are not paying your people well, or if you're not investing resources wisely. So I oftentimes will help organizations kind of come back to that business model and think about what they need to be doing differently in order to build a sustainable business model. Because if we don't attend to that, then the organization's not going to be around in a couple of years. So, other root causes, there's oftentimes some leaders just never really figured out how to lead. They kept getting promoted and promoted, perhaps without getting the underlying like training and management or understanding, what the role really was. Maybe they had, again, like terrible role models. But then what they're doing is starting to enact their own policies. Their dynamics are showing up. And so it's a leadership issue. I've seen a lot of like weak leadership over the last decade of consulting. And oftentimes what I'm doing with leaders then is just, that's a tough love conversation. Like, if you don't do this, this is actually going to continue to bite you in the ass and you're never going to recover from it. Like, the organization won't recover from it if you do not take action. Those are really hard conversations to have, but I know I can't shy away from them because I don't think anybody else is having them necessarily. This is like such a drop in the bucket of so many things I could talk about within organizations. And it has been really, really fun actually starting to make those connections for you all. So I hope that this is as much fun to listen to as it was for me to go through and share these thoughts. I really am excited to just hear your thoughts on this. I would love to hear if there's other things that you're observing within your organizations that you want to lift up and share with me, because I will gladly talk about them on my next solo episode. Or if there's a tricky problem that you're just like, don't know how to approach, feel free to send me an email. I'll keep your name anonymous for sure, unless you give me permission to share it. But my email is erin@allgoodstrategies.com. And yeah, I love doing this. I hope that you're enjoying these solo episodes because they're fun for me to talk about and to be able to actually really talk about the very tangible things in the ways in which I am creating change within these organizations. Oftentimes my work is a little bit more, kind of visionary, abstract and things like that. But I'm really hoping to like take it down to the real nitty gritty level for all of you so that there's some granular things and ways that you can actually, hopefully I've made some good connections for you so that you're like, yes, I know that this is now a symptom of our deeper root cause. And perhaps here's how I'm going to go and talk about my board chair with this, or I'm going to talk to my supervisor about this. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you, or, drop me a line on social media too. Thank you so much for listening. I am so grateful to everybody for listening, and please go support me on Substack if you're able to. We're going to be keeping all of the episodes free, but anything you can throw my way, I'm always appreciative of it. And thank you. I'm going to just give a shout out to Mary, who signed up for a year membership. So thank you so much. I so appreciate that support, and I hope you appreciate the shout out. Thank you all so much.